Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Frampus. I am a partner at Avasant. And today we're going to talk about what is going on around sourcing as it has related through the years, and models that they've changed over the years, and especially over the last year, and talk about items related to that. Joining me today is Ravi Ohri and Oscar Balmore Elizondo de la Garza. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves real quick?
Yeah, sure, Joe. First, thank you very much for inviting me to this. Ravi, very nice to meet you. You can just, Oscar Elizondo is simpler for a very long name in Spanish. So I'm a business services director in Cemex, Mexico. Cemex is a building materials company. We operate in over 50 countries, and we are headquartered in Monterrey, Mexico. We do cement, ready-mix, concrete, aggregates, and urbanization solutions. So, and we've been in outsourcing deals for the last 10 years. I've been involved in those, and hopefully I can chime in on some of the ideas here.
Great. Well, Oscar, likewise, pleasure to meet you, and Avasant team. Thank you, and appreciate sort of the opportunity to be here and speak on this this wonderful topic. So again, my name is Ravi Ohri. I'm a senior vice president at Freddie Mac in the IT chief operating office, and also the CFO of the IT organization there. So do a lot and deal with sourcing just about every day, and sort of where we're dealing with technology and a lot of things that sort of come up and have changed throughout the course of the past year. And I'm looking forward to having that discussion a little bit more wholesome as a part of the next 30 to 45 minutes. So Joe, back to you.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. So I want to set this up a little bit. I can see we all have a little gray. And so we've all been around the sourcing world for many, many years. And so if you think about, if I go back, even back to the 80s and 90s, where sourcing was, let's hire one person. And, they'll do it cradle to grave, and it's one supplier did everything. In the late 90s, you see that change a little bit. You saw it went from there to, let's do a little best in class. And then you went even further and said, well, anybody that can do outsourcing, let's put them into the mix. So, and then not only that is you had deals that were actually in the beginning going 10 years, they went to 7, they went to 5, then you saw things even go down to 3. So it's changed a lot over that. And then over the last recent years, and I'd be interested in both your perspectives, is that I've really seen where they've actually come back to a major supplier and maybe have an ecosystem of suppliers, but under the auspices of one supplier for you. So my first question to you guys is, over the last year, we've seen a dramatic change with the lockdowns and that type of thing. You both are still doing a lot of sourcing. So I kind of want to understand what has changed and how have you dealt with the suppliers, and how did they help you as you guys kind of got through the pandemic. So I'll start with you, Oscar.
So the last year has been very interesting. Let me give you a little bit of history of where we are in our outsourcing endeavors. We took our first very serious shot at outsourcing about 10 years ago. Like many companies, we did have the scenarios that you describe of hiring a firm to basically do staff augmentation and then hire certain specific services as a service. Back then the term wasn't popular, but that was exactly what we were doing. But then back in those days, our finance and accounting team was just recently being consolidated into one big global organization, somewhere around 2,200 people around the world. So right after doing that, we went for a very large single provider 10-year deal, which we are now in our sunset, basically. So what we were looking back there was scale, definitely benefits of that. It was a first generation contract, so there was a big component of labor arbitrage, which we captured, and we captured very nicely. The material savings were there, and there were lots of learnings as well about how to engage on such a large deal, getting through a very complex transition that lasted for more than 18 months. So now as the contract is sunsetting, we have launched a strategy with the support of you guys of Avasant on going to market on a multi-sourcing as a real possibility, going out from a monolith contract that we signed back then into something that is more it gains the benefits of having a variety of suppliers competing for the landscape and bringing their own special flavors for the services. So as a second generation contract, we currently have a much lower cost baseline that we originally had. And now we value the benefits that a healthy competition against among the different suppliers will bring. Last year has been especially relevant because we have started the effort to go to market, and doing this within a pandemic scenario, it has been quite challenging. Managing the large number of RFPs that we have gone through, doing virtually all of the transactions remotely. It has posed certain challenges. Now, the challenge that we expect with the multi-sourcing that we are going to get into is not really the transaction, but really the service integration afterwards, because we may not necessarily end up with a supplier that will put the rest of the suppliers underneath, but rather us playing the multi-sourcing. It's been quite challenging attempting to do all that over the pandemics and with all the restrictions that we have, but so far it's been a good ride.
Okay, Ravi?
Oscar, I think your story is probably not all that unique, and I think several of us have experienced similar type of notions. And I'm a big believer in competition, and competition sort of leads to a thing of beauty. But in the very same breath, having those strategic partners, I think, has been critical, especially during the pandemic, and sort of knowing who you can rely on, knowing who you can trust to be there for you when you need them. Obviously, when you go into sort of a scale of change, making sure that the work product, the delivery is not impacted was probably most critical for us as an organization when you go from everybody in the office to nobody in the office overnight. And so having those strategic partnerships was critical. And we're not a big fully outsourced firm, as opposed to relying on managed services for what I would otherwise consider commoditized functions. So we do it for a variety of different areas where we do feel like it's a commoditized function, and we can benefit from the scale that firm may be able to offer us. And in our case, when we're thinking about sort of who we're going to partner with, we do generally start off with a sense of competition. And we look to 1, 2, maybe 3 partners. And then that partnership would almost become more strategic and narrow in focus to becoming one. But what I'll tell you, over the course of time, it feels like with anything else, sometimes those partnerships start to slip, and you need to widen out that competition a little bit further. So I think that kind of going back and forth through a little bit of a yo-yo is probably more realistic than sort of sticking with one single strategy and being done with it.
I totally agree with you on that, Ravi. The fact of having reliable suppliers through these reliable partners, I would say, through this pandemic has been crucial for us to be able to continue delivering services without any interruption. And we're very proud of what we were able to achieve. And as you said, day one, everyone in the office, including suppliers, and we were able to agree very quickly on a contractual basis on what will be the changes that will be implemented so that they can also protect their people.
So a follow up on that, Ravi, how much did you learn about those strategic relationships and those partners? I mean, did they really come through for you? And what would you say was their part in making sure that you remained a viable client for them, and that you helped them throughout this too?
Yeah, I think look that's a good point, that this became a quick two-way conversation, right? It became a viability on needs that we had as an organization, and likewise the needs that they had as an organization, as every individual was experiencing this for the first time and not really sure what to do. Just a small example, right, is that look, our firm was very big about having labor contractors and vendors being on site. And I consider it to be a little bit of a trust issue potentially, right? And so you learn very quickly that, hey, you can trust your partners to sort of come through this and be okay with this. At the same breath, there was contracts that were in existence that said that the requirement was for the vendor to be on site in order for them to complete their duties, so on and so forth, and using Freddie Mac infrastructure in order to get that. So understanding sort of what needed to change quickly, and where do you sort of say, hey, partner, let's just make sure we come to the table, the virtual table now in this case, and make sure that we continue to allow for business to take place on both ends, as opposed to anything stopping. And what we did is we saw a lot of those strategic partners say, you know what, put everything else to the side. We want to make sure you as our client is taken care of, and we'll figure everything else out on the back end. And can't tell you how much that was appreciated, as opposed to allowing for, I hate to say it, but smaller nuances stop business and productivity from actually going through, because it very easily could have gone in that direction.
Now, did this work, or would this apply to your part of your vendor community that were smaller versus strategic, more tactical versus strategic?
Look, it's a good question, and we do have a variety of vendors that are smaller in nature, diverse counterparties potentially that we're using that could be smaller. And I think it was a little bit of a mixed bag approach from every one of the vendors. And depending on sort of the relationships that had existed prior to it, you figured out who you could quickly pick up the phone and call, and who would answer, type of thing. And I think that's what actually built to some stronger relationships, is realizing that even with some of the smaller counterparties that we deal with, that it didn't matter what time of day, a night it was, we'd pick up the phone call, and they were there. And so I think for us, it was really less of a size of the counterparty on the other end, as opposed to making sure that we came to the table to get the work done in a value-added basis.
So, Oscar, you had a little bit of a different situation, because you were on the cusp of a monolithic contract that was going to go away. And so how did they, I'm assuming that supplier continued to help you or work through whatever the issues were as you started down this path. So how was your experience with them and with your other suppliers there?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because on one end we are in the sunset of the contract, but it hasn't terminated yet. So that is kind of a glide path towards the end. Supplier is the supplier was absolutely willing to collaborate with us, and us with them, obviously, to make sure that service delivery comes only second to people safety. So we were very understanding, and we made certain compromises together. And as Ravi said, of discussions that otherwise in normal circumstances will have taken many days or potentially weeks to agree on, or potentially not even get into an agreement. It was just easier together because we knew that we needed each other in this case. And we were successful in agreeing with them, particularly on things like people working with our finance data elsewhere, the protections that we needed to change in the contract in order for that to happen in a controlled way. And we were very successful in doing that. Suppliers definitely collaborated with us.
Okay, so I'm gonna go a little different track here. So when we talk about deals, we talk about, I always think that doing the contracting piece, picking us the right vendor, supplier, or managed service provider, whoever that may be, and actually getting to a contract is about 5 or 10% of the deal. The next other 90% is actually governing it or doing some sort of vendor management. So I'm kind of curious because nobody was at home, nobody was at the office, everyone was at home. How did that work? Because I contend that, and you guys can please tell me I'm wrong, but I contend that, you know, being in an office, spending time, getting the relationship, understanding the relationship, and working out, and the collaboration, being there presently and being in the office is much better than maybe a Zoom call all the time. So I'm kind of curious on what you guys think about that, and how are you managing these different vendors throughout that process?
Ravi, you want to take it first?
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, Joe, don't undermine the fun that we have in the first 10% of that contract.
I know, there's a lot of fun there, but
that's where all the fun happens, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, you're absolutely right in that the dynamics shifted when everybody went home, and the relationships that were there. You know, in our case, and I'm sure Oscar, in your case as well, many of the vendors and the suppliers are actually, you know, sitting next to us day to day in our organization, and so it becomes less of a formality to have to pick up a phone or to send an email, as opposed to, hey, you guys know you're messing this up, go fix this. So what was otherwise going to be a 3-second me yelling at somebody else to go do it, it gets done, turned into a little bit more of a formal type of conversation, right? And I think that formality changed the dynamic in the relationship just a bit. And again, I think this is probably pretty consistent with even sort of dealing with the workforce, right? And that sense of collaboration that was there has really sort of changed. But I'll also say that over time, we've learned how to make being through email, or in our case, a chat, to be less formal, and for us to have those conversations informally, to where I feel like they're working effectively. Now, don't get me wrong, there's certain things that you miss out on sort of being face to face, and you know, it's just not the same to not see the body reaction, see the body language of the individuals on both sides. Because, you know, I would imagine from a supplier side, even though I try not to interrupt the best I can, but they can see my body language when I'm just not happy with what I'm hearing or saying, right? And that can sort of lead to a level of frustration. So again, I look at it as the dynamic on that sort of 90% of that tail really has certainly changed, but we've also learned a lot in how to make it more effective over the past year. And I think really sort of saying, now look, I have 24/7 access to somebody, because maybe before I may have been a little bit more hesitant to somebody a chat or an email at 1 a.m. Now, no problem. I'm happy to send that note.
I can see. Now, do you feel that relationships are beginning to falter or be non-existent with your vendor?
Yeah, you know what, I will tell you, right? So, and this is broader, right? This is around, to me, sort of the culture and sort of the small talk part of any relationship that is now sort of been pushed to the side. So, you know, when you think about sort of how the relationships have changed, you know, from my perspective, I'm actually okay with some of the change in the relationships that are sort of out there. But at the same point, it is nice to be able to just to be human, and sort of have that human aspect of it is I think a little bit separate. But you know, something that I think several of us in the past have likely chatted about is just sort of the at odds relationship that there is between you know, an organization and the supplier. And how that changes, the dynamic of that relationship changes and becomes somewhat at odds over the course of any relationship, in terms of how you start out, and I'll call it the needs of my organization, in terms of, I want a lower price, and I want higher value, and I want higher service, and then obviously what that means on the other side to the supplier.
So Oscar, give me your experience with this, because again, I mean, both of us are in the States, you're in Mexico. So I'd be kind of interested if there was any change in the dynamics as we've discussed just here in a minute, the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, Joe, it's after we finished the transition, which was a long transition. We
Mm-hmm.
basically moved to a virtual type of governance setup because most of what we did, and I'm going to speak for F&A and IT operations side, most of it is offshore.
Okay.
So the type of service delivery representation that we have is for the day-to-day more tactical, but on the governance side, with as far as the bigger contract goes, most of it was mostly remote after we finished transition. So we didn't suffer it at that level. I have witnessed what Ravi was explained on with my IT colleagues when they need now to manage the delivery team remotely, and there are some nuances that have changed, but for the most part at the global contract governance, we were pretty much there already. And by this time, the supplier has already changed the management team a few times, at least a couple of times. So we went through that exercise at least those times. Now, I believe that is going to be tricky for us as we get into the new deals, because
Mm-hmm.
developing a whole new relationship virtually is going to be it's going to be much different than it was creating the relationship on site, especially as we go, for example, into attempting to do a due diligence. How do you get that gut feeling and human touch that you get when you get to know the people in the delivery center and the delivery leads and all of that? That definitely we will miss that, and we will need to find out how to overcome that, get to trust each other with very formal procedures and formality on the relationship. So I think that those are the two sides that we have, Joe, for our experience here.
So that's good. So you brought up another point. So and Ravi, both of you, is you. I know you both do a lot of outsourcing, and you both have a lot of stuff offshore. So how has the pandemic kind of hurt that, or have you seen performance go down because of that at all? Because it's obviously the countries aren't as have as much of the vaccines as we do here, and I know, and you know, a lot of people do a lot of stuff in India, and you know the hardships they've been going through. Has that affected any of the performance and any of the work that your vendors have been doing?
In my case, for our suppliers, they've been very diligent in having us always informed of what the situation is. And just as we all collectively made changes to the home office setup and all the rules, we are now doing kind of a second round of what do we need to do to support you during this, including approving them to hire new subcontractors and all of that so that they can be ready
Mm-hmm.
for whatever happens on the end. Uh, we haven't seen any decline in either in service levels or in performance so
Oh,
far.
good.
So that's been our experience. However, I don't believe it has come cheap to the supplier. They have definitely
Mm-hmm.
vested and invested in making sure that happens, and so we're glad for that.
Ravi?
Yeah, actually, in our case, we're not a real heavy user and of near and offshore resources. But what I will tell you is that what we've seen or what we've been questioning with our suppliers is any potential secondary impacts of that. Right, knowing that many of our suppliers are in fact do a lot of business globally. And
Mm-hmm.
understanding sort of the impacts on them, the changes that they've had to make as organizations, and sort of seeing if there have been any other secondary impacts. And what I would say is that our suppliers, all of them for the most part, have really adapted very well to sort of the changing circumstances globally, to where we really don't see or feel any impacts. Obviously, certain situations you sort of see and hear in the news, and you have many of your suppliers who potentially could be headquartered or have large presences globally, having impacts there. But for us directly, no impacts.
So I want to ask one final question. And that's really about, what do you think the next couple of years in the future is going to look like as more and more companies open their offices again, as you open your offices? Do you see this virtual still being pervasive, or do you see eventual coming back into the office? Kind of give me your perspective on what you guys are seeing or what you think will happen.
Sure. So I'll happy to look. I personally love the particular topic of the what ifs in the future here, because there is a lot of unknowns.
I was going to make sure that I got a what if question in for you.
well, but all said and done, right? This is coming from an individual who I was not a believer in any sort of virtual setting. You can ask anybody previously; it would have been, if you're not in the office, you're not working type of mindset, right? And carried that for a very long time for no other reason besides I like to see people. So therefore, if I see them, they must be working, right? And I'm gonna. I've learned a lot over the course of the year, and I'll tell you, for me, the biggest change agent to that is the video. Having video, to be able to see somebody on the other side makes it much more of a real experience for me, as opposed to just a call. So I think if video didn't exist, I'd give you a very different answer than I'm about to, which is that I do think the world has permanently changed when it comes to the way that we operate. I also think that the workforce will never go back to being in the office 5 days a week. Now, I do think, and I worry about what productivity and what productivity measurements will look like in the future. Because I do think that that's the fear for any manager, is how do you know your workforce is working effectively, and how do you know that they continue to be as efficient and as productive as they can? But I do think that the world has changed. I do think that this was a defining moment that will change who we are as a society and how we get work done. And we've been able to demonstrate as an organization that we've been very effective working in the at-home environments, to where now, even for me, the thought of going back and sitting in traffic for an hour in the morning to get to the office, oh geez, please don't make me do it, type of thing. So I do think that the environment's changed, but I also don't know that I'm convinced that going back into the office will ever feel the same anyways. And I think that some aspect of a Zoom or Teams meeting will likely be the pervasive way that what we operate, even if we're back into the office. So it's probably more of an accepting thought process of being virtual, being at home, or being remote fully, type of thing.
I cannot agree more with you, Ravi, on that. I do believe that we were full of paradigms that were very quickly broken down on one day, with people just being sent out home and having to trust everyone, feeling that we're all in the same boat and that we needed to row to the same place, otherwise it will get nasty. And it's been a success story so far, at least for us here on my personal case as well. I was somehow used to do some remote work and have my team doing remote work, but not up to this level. I do believe that companies will not necessarily go to the same days. I don't believe either that it can always be remote. I mean, we're humans and we need the human touch, and we need to see each other, and we need to have fun as well. I mean, going to the office needs to have an element of fun and team development, and knowing the families of our collaborators, and creating those bonds, right, that ultimately take you through hardship when it comes. So, but I agree with Ravi. I don't think it's going to come to the same days we had before, with 8x5, 10 by 5 or more, right?
Well, gentlemen, this was fascinating. We don't have any more time left, but we do appreciate the time you did spend us and your thoughts and on this topic. Appreciate the time with you, and thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks, Ravi. Pleasure.